Welcome to today's live webinar session on Welcome to the World of Compliance, Part 2. Today's session will be recorded and made available to the membership on the NCAA Learning Portal following the conclusion of the seminar. Only NCAA member institutions or administrators with a single source sign-in account will have access to the recorded session. However, any visual materials shared during this session will be available on the Regional Rules Seminar webpage on ncaa.org at a later date. Before we begin today, please note the following housekeeping items. Please ensure your speakers are turned up appropriately and that you mute your line if you're on a telephone, or that you mute the icon on the screen if you are tuning in from a computer or other device. Please do not place your phone line on hold, as background music and advertisements and other hold features may be distracting to everyone else tuned into the webinar. If you have technical issues during this webinar, for example, you can't hear the presenter, please ensure your speakers are working and check the settings on your device. If all else fails, please reach out to your IT administrator. To ask questions during the webinar, use the chat feature that is available on your screen. You should see an icon to open the chat function. Simply type in your question and press send. All right, well, we will turn it over. I'm so happy for you all to join us today to listen into this session of Welcome to the World. To start us off on today's session, I am going to introduce Tom Hosty and Laura Wertz-McNabb to walk us through how to conduct an investigation, Part 2. With that, Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And again, my name is Tom Hosty. I'm one of the NCAA Directors of Enforcement, and my colleague, Laura Wertz-McNabb, is one of our Associate Directors of Enforcement, and she and I will be presenting this today. And again, as Sarah indicated, this is Part 2 of the session, How to Conduct an Investigation. And this is a continuation of what our colleagues on the enforcement staff, Brenda Barnhart and Russell Register, presented in Part 1. Which was recorded and is available online to all of you. Hopefully you've already watched Part 1's presentation, but if not, we're going to briefly recap that for you. So Sarah, we can go to the first slide. So let's just give you an overview of what we're going to cover in this session. Now, as I said a moment ago, we're going to recap Part 1, which is how to conduct an on-campus investigation. Then we're going to discuss additional interview considerations. We'll then go into how to analyze information from your investigation. We'll then talk about collaborative investigations with the enforcement staff. We'll cover how we process Level 1 and Level 2 cases. We'll then go over some available resources. And finally, at the end, we'll take your questions. And as Sarah said, you can feed us questions to the chat function. So as we go through the session, please feel free to supply your questions to the chat function, and Laura and I will hold those to the end, and we'll take them up at that time. So Sarah, we can go to the next slide. So again, let's review what Brenna and Russell covered in Part 1. First, prior to any investigation, it is strongly recommended that your institution have in place an investigative policy. This will help guide you should you need to investigate a possible violation in your athletic program. This policy could include things such as what triggers an investigation, who will be on the investigative team, what are the roles and responsibilities of each member, what resources are available to the team, and what will be the reporting process should violations be confirmed. Second, when you realize it is necessary to conduct an investigation, you should take some time developing a case strategy. Things to strategize on could include who to interview and what documents to collect. You should also consider which NCAA bylaws are in play, such as recruiting contact bylaws or academic misconduct bylaws. Finally, you should consider whether any violation will render a student athlete ineligible, which would necessitate seeking their reinstatement. Third, as you collect documents relevant to your investigation, consider the low-hanging fruit first. These are the documents easily accessible through your institution's own databases. things such as recruiting software records, telephone and text records, financial aid records, and so on. But sometimes you may need to ask coaches and student athletes for their records, such as their own personal bank records or automobile records. Fourth, Brenna and Russell introduced the role of interviews in your investigation. Interviews of coaches, student athletes, parents, institutional staff, and other people are almost always the most important source of information to any investigation, and so you will need to be prepared to conduct these. We recommend doing interviews in person versus remotely. We also recommend doing the interviews in a secured, confidential room, and that you record the interview. So Sarah, we can move to the next slide. So let's expand for a moment on interview techniques and strategies. The objective of all investigations is to collect the facts so that you can do your analysis on whether a violation occurred or not. There are several techniques to help you achieve this objective. First, you should consider the sequence of the interviews. As you compile the list of people that you want to interview, you should keep in mind one overriding goal, and that is to protect your investigation. You want to protect the integrity of it. This means trying to prevent intentional and unintentional acts that may try to unduly influence your fact gathering. And we do not suggest that this will happen every time, but you should ask yourself, who may have committed the violation? Who stands to be penalized? And would this person try to obstruct or influence your fact gathering? Sometimes if a key student athlete's eligibility could be at risk, people could circle the wagons to prevent this student athlete from missing any games. This is why the sequence of interviews can be an important technique that you employ. For instance, in an investigation of a possible impermissible recruiting contact violation, you may decide you want to interview the former prospect who is now your student athlete, and perhaps his mother, along with the assistant coach alleged to have had the contact and the head coach. As tempting as it may be to go straight to the assistant coach and ask them if they did it, you may consider interviewing the student athlete and the mother first, then perhaps the head coach, and finally the assistant coach. If you interview the assistant coach first, they may tell you the truth, or they may choose to lie and deny a violation. Then, in this scenario, they would be motivated to get to the student athlete and the mother before you can, and try to influence or pressure their testimony. The enforcement staff has seen this happen more times than we care to count. So let's pause here, and I'm going to give you a hypothetical scenario of a possible investigation that you might conduct on your campus. And we'll talk through some possible sequence of the interviews that you would conduct. In this hypothetical scenario, imagine that you have two of your own volleyball student athletes come to your office, and they complain that the head coach has been practicing the team too long, on too many days, and in many of the weeks. You had done a good job in providing rules education to the student athletes at the start of the year, and they know the daily and weekly limits on practice. In fact, they have been keeping track on their own, and they realize that the head coach oftentimes keeps the team an extra 30 minutes a day. And so each week, this may add up to 2 extra hours of practice a week. In this hypothetical scenario, let's imagine that you've decided you are going to interview 5 individuals. This includes the head coach, the assistant coach, student athlete 1, student athlete 2, and the trainer. Now, you can imagine what sequence would be the best sequence to interview people. There's one scenario where you might decide to interview the assistant coach first, followed by the head coach, the trainer, and then the 2 student athletes. We would not recommend this approach. As I said earlier, the the coaches were the ones, especially the head coach, that may have engaged in the violation. They may tell you the truth at the beginning, but if they don't, they could be in a position of influence, and they may try to unduly influence the student-athlete's testimony. Instead, the sequence of interviews that we would recommend would be to interview student-athlete 1 and student-athlete 2 first, followed by the trainer, then the 2 coaches. And as we know with the trainers, they sometimes have a lot of information. They're frequently very much aware of the practice times, how long practice goes, and student-athletes oftentimes talk with them. So that's another important person to interview, and we would have that person interviewed after the student-athletes and before the coaches. Sarah, I think we can go to the next slide now. Another important technique before any interview is preparation. Now, there is an old trial attorney adage that the best way to ensure success in trial is to prepare, prepare, prepare. The same is true in investigations and interviews. Try to learn as much about the person as you can. Perform some free and public research on the person by, for instance, Googling them or checking their social media posts. You can also review all pertinent documents that you may have collected related to this person. For instance, do your institution's financial aid records reveal any information, or maybe your personnel records, or perhaps your recruiting records? These different records could give you some insights into the people that you're about to interview. Finally, prepare the questions you will ask. We call this the interview outline. Preparing such an outline will ensure that you conduct a fair and thorough interview. Start with the basic background information about the person, and then you can slowly dive into the events surrounding the alleged violation. Build in a lot of questions designed to get to the details, the classic questions such as the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Sarah, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. That brings us to questioning techniques. Now, the best style of question in every interview is the open-ended question. These are questions that begin with a command. Let's say you are investigating a violation that occurred at dinner on Saturday night of the prospective student-athlete's official visit. Let me give you some examples of some open-ended questions that you may ask the student-athlete about this particular visit, and then specifically the Saturday night dinner. You could start with a very broad, open-ended question, such as, tell me about your official visit. You could then reduce the scope and ask another open-ended question as a follow-up. Tell me about what you did on Saturday of your official visit. You'll notice both of these are command questions. Tell me, asking for the student-athlete to give you a narrative. As the student-athlete responds, you could continue to follow up with questions, but again, you can use open-ended questions to continue to narrow the focus of the topic. For instance, the next question that you may ask could be, tell me about dinner that Saturday night. You could then narrow it even further with another open-ended question, such as, walk me through what the coach talked about at dinner. Finally, you could get down even further with another open-ended question, such as, describe for me what the coach said about your parents and their attendance at your games. You'll notice that each of these questions, including the follow-up questions, were open-ended questions. I started broad and I slowly narrowed to the conversation at dinner about the potential violation related to the parents. Let's next talk about the pregnant pause. In the interview, you should get comfortable allowing for pregnant pauses. So, for example, you would ask your open-ended question, allow the person to answer your question, and then instead of rushing in with a new question, allow for a pause after they respond. Sometimes the person may not be done and may be still trying to extract information from their memory. Also, they may have given you incomplete information, so the pause can create an awkward space between two people. If you are disciplined and don't rush in, the other person will likely resume talking, which is exactly what you want. They have the information in their heads, not you. So pause and let them keep talking. The technique of avoiding interrupting the person goes hand in hand with the pregnant pause. But you also don't want to interrupt the person and start talking on top of them or trying to help them answer the question. Let them speak. Be disciplined and stay out of their way. Again, they have the information you seek, so let them talk. Also, make sure before you leave a subject area or finish the interview that you ask all of the important follow-up questions to make sure you get all of the details. Finally, you should feel free to challenge the person with follow-up questions when things don't make sense or don't add up. A simple approach like, I hear what you're saying, but what you say is not consistent with what the records show and what others are saying. Help me understand this. Another approach could be, a moment ago, you said the mom was not there at the home visit, and just now you said that she was. Which one is it? These are examples of appropriate challenge questions to a witness whose information is not quite adding up. So let's next talk about analyzing your information. And Sarah, we can move to the next slide. Now, as I said a moment ago, the objective of every investigation is to collect all the facts so that you can do your analysis on whether any violation occurred. At the end, you should ask yourself whether any more interviews or documents are needed. If not, then it is time to do the analysis. Taking your facts and looking at the appropriate bylaws, you must analyze. Do these facts indicate a violation? Yes or no? You can consult with your conference office or even the academic and membership affairs staff to help you with your analysis. If the answer is no, then you've done your job. Document your work, including your analysis and your conclusion, and simply file it away. However, if the answer is yes, that there is a violation, you will need to determine right away whether this impacts a student-athlete's eligibility. If it does, then you will need to declare the student-athlete ineligible and seek their reinstatement from the NCAA reinstatement staff. Later, there will be a presentation in this year's regional rules that deal with how to do this. If you do confirm a violation, you will need to assess what level the violation is. In Division I, it may be a Level 1 violation, which is the most egregious. It could be a Level 2 violation, a serious violation, or it could be a Level 3 violation, the least serious and the most common type of violation. You'll want to consult with bylaws 19.1.1 and 19.13, as well as case precedent in RSRO and LSTBI to help you make these determinations. Also, you can attend our enforcement staff session on Level 3 violations to learn more about this analysis. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Laura Wertz-McNabb, to walk you through how you can collaborate with the enforcement staff in your investigations.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Wertz-McNabb. I am one of the 17 enforcement staff who investigate and process Division 1, 2, and 3 cases. One question that is often asked is how the enforcement staff becomes involved in an investigation. Most investigations begin with a member institution submitting a self-report of NCAA violations. Include Level 3 RISRO reports or self-reports submitted directly to John Duncan, Vice President of Enforcement, or Derek Crawford, the Manager of Investigations and Processing. We also receive requests from institutions to assist with investigations that may involve complex and/or potentially serious types of violations, such as unethical conduct or academic misconduct. Additionally, various sources will provide the enforcement staff with credible, factual, and specific information of potential violations. If the information involves potential level 1 or level 2 violations, the enforcement staff may work with the involved institution in conducting a collaborative investigation. If you have questions about whether to involve the enforcement staff, please contact us to discuss the issues. In many cases, we provide guidance as to how the institution may conduct its own investigation and submit a self-report should violations be substantiated. Sarah, can we go to the next slide? In all cases, the membership has adopted a legislative responsibility to cooperate in the infractions process per bylaw 19.2.3. This affirmative obligation extends to current and former institutional staff members, prospective student athletes, and enrolled student athletes. This affirmative obligation arises due to the Commission on College Basketball's efforts as of August 2018. This responsibility was enhanced to provide detailed examples of what cooperation may entail. Specific examples of the requirement are on the next slide. This is from the legislation bylaw 19.23, and these are some of the examples of what a responsibility to cooperate entails. Some of them include assist in developing full information and timely participation in interviews and providing truthful and complete responses. When a collaborative investigation begins, the enforcement staff will provide a notice of the responsibility to cooperate, especially in interviews with current and former staff members, as well as prospective enrolled student athletes. If you are conducting an on-campus investigation and have concerns that certain parties are not cooperating or have questions regarding how to best communicate the institution's responsibility to cooperate, please contact the enforcement staff and we will provide assistance. Sarah, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. During a collaborative investigation of potential level 1 or level 2 violations, the enforcement staff and institution will interview parties involved in the alleged violations, as well as those parties who have oversight of and provide support to the involved sports program. So let's take Tom's previous example of the 2 women's volleyball student athletes who came to your office to report that the head coach had been conducting practices with the women's volleyball team too often and for too long. Prior to conducting interviews, the enforcement staff and institution will inform the interviewees of their responsibility to cooperate, which includes protecting the integrity of the investigation by not speaking to others other than the personal legal counsel about the interviews. During the interviews with the student athletes, the trainer, the compliance staff, the sports supervisor, the assistant coaches, and the head coach, the enforcement staff and institution will ask questions about the potential impermissible, countable, athletically related activity or CARA violations. The enforcement staff and institution will also ask about areas such as bylaw 11.1.1.1, which is the head coach responsibility legislation, and if applicable, bylaw 10.1, which involves potential unethical conduct violations. For head coach responsibility, questions will be asked as to how the head coach promoted compliance and how did he or she monitor their sports program. For those cases that may present potential unethical conduct violations, the enforcement staff will ask questions based on the facts as well as the applicable enforcement staff charging guidelines related to unethical conduct. As noted on the bottom of this slide and the upcoming resources slide, the enforcement staff's internal operating procedures include charging guidelines related to head coach responsibility, unethical conduct, failure to monitor, and a lack of institutional control. If in Tom's example, the head women's volleyball coach became aware that 2 student athletes reported concerns to compliance, and the head coach subsequently contacted other women's volleyball student athletes and the assistant coach before they were interviewed and told them to not be forthcoming or honest about the practice activities during their interviews, This could result in derivative violations where the head coach committed unethical conduct by influencing others to provide false or misleading information, and also potentially failed in his or her responsibilities as a head coach. Additionally, the enforcement staff will ask about the institution's rural education efforts, compliance systems, monitoring efforts, and a response to the alleged CARA violations. The questions about the institution's compliance efforts help the enforcement staff understand the institution's compliance environment and determine the extent of the institution's responsibility for the occurrence of the underlying violations and whether it may have failed to monitor or lack institutional control. Sarah, can we go to the next slide? Once the investigation is completed, the enforcement staff will assess all of the information to determine whether NCAA violations have been substantiated, and if so, how those violations should be processed. This detailed chart shows how the NCAA violations are substantiated. There are various processing aspects of each violation that must be considered. First, and as Tom previously noted, violations impacting a student-athlete's eligibility that require reinstatement should be submitted and reviewed by the NCAA student-athlete reinstatement staff. The enforcement staff will work with the institution to identify in a timely manner potential SAR concerns. The enforcement staff will review the institutional violations by applying the legislative definitions and examples of the 3 levels of the violation. And as Tom mentioned earlier, those would be bylaws 19.1.3, which is level 3 violations, 19.1.2, level 2 violations, and bylaw 19.1.1, which is level 1 violations. The enforcement staff will also consider case precedent and guidance from the Division I Committee on Infractions to determine the level of each of the alleged violations. If the violations are determined to be level 3, the institution will submit the violations through RISRO. We encourage you to attend the level 3 session presented by Kelly Grody and Janet Calandro on June 18th for more information. If the violations are alleged to be level 1 and or level 2, there are 4 processing avenues. When one or more of the parties disagree with the facts of the violations and or the alleged level of the violations, the case is reviewed through a hearing with a hearing panel of the Committee on Infractions, also known as the COI. The hearing may be via video conference, in person, or in writing. The second potential avenue is when the parties agree with the facts of the case and the overall level of the violations. The parties may submit a written report known as a summary disposition report. As part of the summary disposition report, the institution and involved individuals will propose penalties. The enforcement staff does not determine or assess the penalties an institution or involved party ultimately propose to the hearing panel. A hearing panel will consider the summary disposition report with the following 3 potential outcomes. One outcome is the hearing panel accepting the report. Once the hearing panel issues a decision, the parties do not have the ability to appeal. A second outcome is the hearing panel may reject the report. If rejected, the case will then be considered via a hearing. Or the third outcome is the hearing panel may accept the report, but also prescribe additional penalties. If the parties accept the additional penalties, the hearing panel issues a decision and the parties cannot appeal the decision. If the parties do not accept the additional penalties, the hearing panel will conduct an expedited hearing to discuss only the additional penalties. The hearing panel will then issue a decision and the penalties may be appealed to the Infractions Appeals Committee, also known as the IAC. The third avenue to process level 1 or level 2 violations was adopted as of August 2018 and is the negotiated resolution process. For the negotiated resolution process to occur, the parties, including the enforcement staff, must agree to the facts of the violations, the levels of the violations, the aggravating and mitigating factors, and the penalties as dictated by the penalty matrix available in Figure 19-1 of the Division I Manual. If you are interested in additional information about the current trends in negotiated resolution cases, there will be a session on June 18th presented by our fellow enforcement staff members, Therese Joyce, Sharika Montgomery, and Derek Crawford, and we encourage you to go. The last and also recent addition to processing of Level 1 and Level 2 cases is the Independent Accountability Resolution process. This processing method is for highly complex cases. Naima Stevenson Starks, Vice President of Hearing Operations, and the staff of the Infractions Appeals Committee and the Office of the Committee on Infractions will be providing the LMS session regarding the process in the near future. This slide, oh, can you go to the last slide, please? Thank you. This slide provides numerous enforcement staff resources which are available through ncaa.org. Under the Division I Enforcement section, the enforcement staff internal operating procedures, which encompass, sorry, got a dog, the charging guidelines are available for review. Hold a second. I apologize. I had a feeling that might happen. Also available is a membership resource guide that can help with institutional investigations and self-report information. You may also find the head coach responsibility guide that you can provide to head coaches and assistant coaches to begin discussions and or enhance the compliance discussions regarding their responsibility related to their promotion and monitoring of NCAA rules. While not included on this slide, another resource is LSDDI, where past major Level 1 and Level 2 COI decisions are available for your review. Sarah, can we go to the next slide? All right, so we've hit to the portion now. Tom and I are available to answer questions that you may have regarding the information provided today or during Part 1 of Welcome to the World of Enforcement. I will include in the chat area in case you have questions that you feel is more of a one-on-one type discussion having to do with your institution. I'm going to include Tom's and my email address should you want to reach out and ask questions. But right now I'm going to open it up to the chat function and see if anybody has any questions. All right, I am not seeing any unless I'm missing it.
And Laura, do you want to tell them where to find the chat function just in case?
Oh, yeah. So, and I may need a little help with this. It should be at the top of the presentation, and if you go to the top, there should be a chat button that you can chat with participants, and you can send the question to either just the hearing panelists or all attendees. So one of the questions that came to all the panelists, and I'll let Tom take this one, is should you include legal counsel on all investigations or only on majors?
Okay, yeah, so this is really the university's decision. What we see, a very common practice is that if you are investigating a potential major violation or a Level 1 or Level 2 violation, oftentimes universities or colleges will include their general counsel or outside counsel in the investigation. And I'm going to break this down into a couple of subheadings in a minute. But first, if you're looking at a potential Level 3 investigation, it's your choice there as well. It's typically the investigative team may be the compliance officer by themselves. They may include the faculty athletic representative. They may include in-house counsel to help them with the investigation. I think what this question could be getting at is sort of those potential major violations, and I may be adding something else here. So a question we oftentimes get is, if my university has a potential major violation or Level 1 or Level 2, and let's say the enforcement staff is involved, should we seek outside counsel, or should we use our in-house counsel and just simply turn it over to them? Again, that's your institution's decision. We Laura and I have done a lot of different investigations, and we've seen institutions manage it quite well on their own. But oftentimes, I think it's more likely that institutions will retain outside counsel when the enforcement staff is involved in a major investigation. Usually these become much more complex, and there's more at stake. And so we do oftentimes collaborate and work with the university's retained outside counsel. And again, sometimes schools will use their in-house counsel to do that same function. But again, it's completely the school's choice. We've seen it done successfully by schools in any of those different scenarios quite well.
Thanks, Tom. Another question that we received was how many people, and in parentheses it says compliance, should be doing the interviews? And I'll answer it and then let Tom chime in. It'll depend on your compliance staff. Usually one person is okay. If you feel like you need additional people in the room, it's always good to have 2 people in the room versus 1. It's at the point where if the interviewee is going to start feeling uncomfortable or, for lack of a better phrase, ganged up on, so you may want to keep that in mind. So if it's a complex, long type of interview, it's really good to have more than 1 person in the room because there's a lot to keep track of. But if it's a short interview and you think you can get the information and you can make the person feel comfortable, 1's fine too. You kind of just have to gauge the situation and the types of violations that you're asking questions about. Tom?
That was a great answer. I have nothing else to add to that.
Okay. Tom, the next question is, at the onset of an investigation, how do you determine the leveling of potential violations?
You often don't. So again, you typically let the case take it where it will take you. And so, you know, this is where I think if you have an investigative policy, this will kind of help dictate what you should do. Again, to Laura's point, I agree that 2 heads are always better than 1. And so if there's 2 people, at least on the investigative team, they can at least begin the fact gathering. And I think after maybe several interviews and some document collection, you may be able to start to see which way it's going, if it's potentially a level 3 or a level 1 or level 2. Sometimes, though, it's apparent right on the face what you're potentially looking at. So in my hypothetical situation involving the football coach buying dinner for the prospect and the father, that on its face is probably a level 3, if that's all that was involved there. So that would kind of tell you that you're investigating a potential level 3 violation. Going back to the volleyball example involving countable athletic related activities, that's a CARA type case. That one is kind of it could go either way. It could be a level 2 if it's occurred enough times over, maybe over 2 seasons, for instance, where maybe this institution or the team is starting to get a competitive advantage. Or alternatively, if it's limited, it may be level 3. So that CARA example that we gave you could go either way. So again, you typically have to start the investigation and start to collect the facts to try to begin the assessment. And it's really not clear until you get to the end of the fact gathering that you'll be able to do a really fair assessment.
All right, and the next question is, should you audio/video record an interview/investigation? I'll take first shot at it. I would say yes, with the big caveat of always do so with giving them bylaw 10.1, letting them know ahead of time that they will be recorded, and also checking in with your general counsel to make sure that you're complying with all institutional, state laws, everything that you have to do there. But it is always helpful to have recordings from our perspective, in the sense of if it does become a level 1 or 2 case, then that information is extremely helpful, and sometimes we don't have to retread ground that you've already gone over. So, Tom, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say that the enforcement staff, we try to audio record all of our interviews whenever possible. If a witness objects, or if in our view we think the recording could have a chilling effect, we don't do it then. But we try to audio record all of our interviews. We typically do not video record our interviews. And again, it's just our discretion and choice. You're always got to be mindful of the chilling effect something like that could have on a witness. And so it's just something else to consider. But we audio record all of our interviews whenever possible.
And are there any other questions before I wrap up? My dog's a Great Dane, if that's the question that you had.
And as Laura said, you can always email Laura and myself directly after this. If you have one-on-one type questions, we'd be happy to answer those too.
All right, well, Tom and I thank you for your time. Again, like Tom said, if you have any questions, let us know. It doesn't have to be Tom or myself, it's for someone else you know on our staff. We are all available for questions. We appreciate your time and thank you so much for participating. And I will turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Laura and Tom. A huge shout out to both of you for sitting in on today's session and presenting to all the participants. We really appreciate it. I know that I find it very informative reviewing this process and though, because it can be complicated at times. So with that, I am going to pass it on to our next presenter. We are phasing into our second presentation right now with the Eligibility Center, and I will turn it over to Ms. Kara Carlson to walk us through her presentation. So Kara, take it away.
Hi, everyone. As Sarah said, my name is Kara Carlson. I am the Assistant Director in Outreach and Strategic Partnerships in the EC, and I'm really happy to be here with you today, provide you with an overview on who and what the Eligibility Center is, along with some important best practices and resources. So what is the Eligibility Center? We are the group within the NCAA that's responsible for reviewing and processing academic and amateurism certifications for all PSAs. We are part of the Regulatory Affairs group along with AMA and Enforcement. And I just wanted to provide you with a few stats so you kind of understand who we're working with and what our volume is through a typical year. In a year, we usually see 200,000 Eligibility Center accounts, and half of those are the certification accounts. So those are students who are planning to play Division I or Division II sports. We work with about 8,000 international students, and that number tends to grow every year, which is exciting to bring in a new group of people. Our staff has learned a lot about international certifications over the last 12 years, so we're bringing in a lot of those students. Our customer service staff has taken 21,000 membership calls in a year. And as you know, we work with 1,100 member schools and universities. And then 32,000 high schools are in our system, with the overwhelming majority of those are cleared with core course lists. So the Eligibility Center is made up of two units. We have our internal affairs staff and our external operations. And between those departments, we have 6 core departments. So to do those amateurism and academic certifications, there's a lot of going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of groups working together to get those done. And I'm going to talk about all of those groups today in the presentation, but one I want to point out right now that I'm not going to bring up later, but I wanted to give them a shout out, is our operations and analytics team. You will likely never work with this group. They're behind the scenes. They keep our website running. They are doing portal enhancements for our membership and our high school portal, which I think everyone is going to be really excited about when they're done. They are the ones who work on updating our registration, and anytime we have website problems, they are the ones we go to. So I just wanted to give them a quick shout out, since I know likely you guys won't work with them since they are working behind the scenes. So when you start working with the Eligibility Center, I'm sure some of you are very familiar with the membership portal. This is where you're going to get all your information related to initial eligibility. It's going to where you're doing the vast majority of your work related to your PSAs. And in the portal, you'll see right here we have several links, lots of resources. I'm going to touch on some of those later, some of the really important ones that you guys will want to be aware of. But next, I'll just talk about several things you can do in the portal. So the portal is where you'll do all your IRL activations, and it's where you can search your student details once those students are activated. So once those students are on your IRL, you'll be able to search them, see all their information, their high schools, their amateurism questionnaire. You'll be able to monitor their student tasks. So when we assign tasks to PSAs, you're going to see those tasks in their account within the student details, and it's going to be worded the exact way it's worded in that student's account. And you'll be able to see the date it was assigned as well as the date it was completed. You're also going to get access to the student documents for academics and amateurism. So you'll be able to see transcripts that have been submitted for the student, and then you'll be able to see all the documents that are related to their amateurism review. So this can be really helpful when you have questions about the status of an amateurism review. Anything, any correspondence that we've had with the PSA, you'll be able to access. Any research that our team has done, you'll be able to access there, and anything that we've reached out to a third party for. So we had to contact our outside soccer team with questions. All that information is going to be in their student details, so you will be able to see that. It's a great way to know where the review is at and if we're waiting on anything moving forward. And then the last thing I was going to mention is that you can run reports in the portal. And these reports are really a great way to keep track of your PSAs with open tasks. So I know you can go in sport by sport and pull those lists to see what people are missing, but you can run a report for all the PSAs on your IRLs that have open tasks. So if you just want to see everybody who's missing transcripts or test scores, you can run the open task report. And that's a great way to just do that in one fell swoop. And then if you want to run a report where we are waiting on information from third parties, you can do that as well. So sometimes we task a student's account, but really the student isn't the one who can get us the information. We just need that to live in the student's account, so we have record of it. But you can run a report, so anyone that we're asking for a matriculation letter on your IRL, the student can't provide that. That would have to come from your institution. So that's a great way to double check that you're not missing anyone who needs a matriculation letter. Or if we've reached out to a third-party team for amateurism, you can see that in the report as well. So those are really great ways just to keep track of everyone, let your coaches know what they're missing and that type of thing. And like I said, we also have a lot of great resources on the portal. If you go to the resource page, there's so much on there. It can all be really helpful depending on what information you're looking for. But I just wanted to highlight a few of them for you guys. We have some educational resources. The first one is the Guide for the Compliance Administrator. This is a great guide if you're new to compliance. And honestly, even if you've been there 10 years, this could be something you bookmark and go back to, because it's got a lot of little things that maybe just you don't have memorized or you don't have to deal with every day. So this is a great thing to bookmark. It's updated annually. We'll have the new one out in August. But it's just a comprehensive guide of what the Eligibility Center is, what each unit does. It's got a lot of best practices and resources, and it's kind of a more in-depth version of this presentation. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't. And then we have our Guide to International Academic Standards. If you work with a lot of international students, this is something you definitely want to bookmark. We have over 170 countries in there, and it includes the country's timeline for graduation, native language, what they call Year 9. It's got approved credentials for graduation. It has non-approved credentials for graduation. And then depending on just the level of information we have, you can see the crediting, you can see the grading scales. Often there's multiple grading scales. And then also some approved courses and non-approved courses, as well as if there's ever just like any additional information that you need to be aware of for that country. We are actually updating that quarterly because we're constantly learning new things. We're adding new countries quite a bit. I think we added probably 4 countries this year. And if you have this bookmarked, you don't ever have to worry about like downloading it again because the link automatically updates. The updates will just be there when you go to the link, and any new updates will be listed at the front of the guide. So again, if you work with international students, this is a really important guide to have. Share it with your coaches, share it with your PSAs. Next, we have a lot of how-to resources that you can use. The first one I listed is the initial eligibility waiver best practices. So when you are submitting that initial eligibility waiver, this is a great resource on knowing what needs to be included, questions you need to ask, and this is just meant to put your waiver in the best possible situation to be approved. So that's a great one to access if you are going to submit a waiver. We also have a how-to on requesting urgent certifications. I'm sure everybody is going to run into that issue at some point, needing an urgent certification. So there's a guide on how to do that through the portal. And then we have an FAQ on how to use our academic record submission form. So lots of resources on how to get things done, and that will probably answer a lot of your questions. And then we also have a lot of our forms on there. So sometimes we request something from you. You'll go to the portal, you can download it from there. For example, anytime we request a matriculation letter, you can go ahead and get that off the portal. You can find our academic inconsistency form there, and also our final certification disclaimer. So if you have a PSA and you know that there's an open task, but whatever that open task is for, we just can't get that information, but we need to move forward, you can complete the final certification disclaimer. We'll move forward with that open task without that information. So lots of things that you can check out on the resources. I know it's a little overwhelming at first, but you'll definitely want to dive in, and I think a lot of your questions can be answered with some of those resources. And then another big one I want to plug is our newsletter. This is directed just towards Division I and Division II membership. Since those are who we certify, it comes out monthly, and if you subscribe on the link on the portal, it will come directly to you each month. You can also download it off the portal, but if you want, it'll come direct to your inbox. It's got lots of important reminders, so you know, just the things that come up every year that you need to remind your coaches or PSAs or you need to do on campus, we'll always put those in there for you at a timely place so you know, and it's just a helpful reminder to you. We always put our updates, latest news in there. You can see from the screenshot, that's where we put out our COVID-19 automatic waiver information. If we ever have any office closures, we'll put it in there. So it's just a really important resource. We try not to make it too wordy because we know everybody's busy, but this is information that can help you guys on campus. So I really recommend subscribing if you haven't already. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about our different units that work on the certifications and just some information that you need to know about their process. So the first one I'll talk about is our core processing team in academics. So just like it sounds, they are the ones that process the academic certification. They do preliminary evaluations and final evaluations, and they're doing those year-round based on IRL cycles. So as you might guess, we prioritize based on IRL cycle because we want to work on the students that are enrolling in the next year, but we'll do preliminary evaluations for students that aren't enrolling this fall. We've done prelims for sophomores, juniors. If we have the transcripts, we can do the prelims. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then one of the big things, like I mentioned earlier, you can request urgent certifications. And you can request those you can request a preliminary certification or a final. So you may have a junior and you know you're not getting a final certification, but you just need to know where the student stands going into senior year. You can request that certification. And how you do that is you look in their count, there'll be a status, and I've listed those statuses here. We have ready to process preliminary. That means we've got the transcripts and the test scores, but no proof of grad, so we can do that preliminary evaluation. We have ready to process academic. That means we have transcripts and test scores, but there's an open task, and it's an open academic task. And an example would be, we received the transcript, but there is a designation on there, and we don't know what it means, so we had to task the high school for it. Well, we still may be able to do a preliminary evaluation with all the other courses on there. So we can move forward and do that preliminary and just not enter that information we're waiting on. The only caveat to that is if a prelim's already been done and we've determined, well, we can't move forward without that information, then you wouldn't be able to request a prelim there. But if we hadn't, yes, you can request that. And then finally, ready to process final. We have all test scores, we have all transcripts, and we have proof of grad. There's no outstanding tasks, so you can submit that request. The service standard for an urgent request is 24 hours from the time of request. So just keep that in mind. Our normal service standard is 10 business days. You probably all know it's usually done a bit faster, but the urgent standard is 24 hours. Next, we have our core processing amateurism. Something that is new to this team is that they are now doing preliminary amateurism reviews. We received this feedback from the membership for quite some time that they kind of wanted the prelims like they get on the academic side because they want to be able to plan, they want to be able to educate their coaches and their PSAs. So we're really glad we can provide this at this point. We have the bandwidth, we have the staff now, so we are doing these preliminary amateurism reviews. What these look like is before a student requests final, our staff is going to go into the account, do the review best they can with the information they have, and they are going to issue a decision, which it's not technically a decision, it's going to remain preliminary reviewed, but there's going to be information in the account that says, you know, we reviewed this, we don't identify any potential amateurism issues. And on the flip side, they could say, we've reviewed this, we've identified these issues, any further participation could jeopardize your amateur status. And then also we could just say, we've reviewed this, you haven't jeopardized your amateurism status to this point, but you've reached the end of your grace period, any further participation could jeopardize that status. So this is just meant to provide you with more information, hopefully maybe even prevent some amateurism issues if we can get to PSAs before they compete beyond those grace periods. So like I said, this is new. I believe it started at the end of November, so you probably started to see this with some of your students. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our customer service staff when you see those preliminary decisions. But hopefully this is helping you out on campus. And then as a reminder, PSAs need to request their final amateurism to receive a final certification. So those fall enrollees can request starting April 1. Prior to that fall, they're going to enroll. And winter-spring enrollees can request starting October 1st, prior to that winter-spring enrollment period. Enrollment periods are important with amateurism reviews. They should reflect the first time enrolling at a Division I or Division II institution. So I know we have a lot of two-year transfer students, and oftentimes they'll list their enrollment period as when they enrolled at the junior college, but we need them to update that so it's whatever they're enrolling at the D1 or the D2. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're working with your recruits, double checking those on campus, because they can delay a certification if we have to go back in and ask, and then they have to go update it and then re-request final. So that is something you can do on campus to be proactive, verify that that enrollment period is accurate. And then amateurism also has an urgent request program available. So you can do that the same way you would do the academic certification. There is a resource for that as well on our portal. Next up is our high school review staff. This is the group, it sounds exactly like it. It's called, they evaluate high schools and non-traditional programs for use in NCAA academic certifications. So anytime a new school comes across our desk, we get a transcript from a school we have not heard of before, or they don't have an account with us, we are proactive and we start that process with them. We try to engage with them and get them to engage back with us, get us the information that's required. And then we have the group that reviews the core course submissions. So once those high schools are cleared or those non-traditional programs are cleared, they can submit their core course list. We have a staff that reviews those. Important to note, high schools can submit core courses all year round. They can submit them after they've been cleared for 20 years. It doesn't matter. We're always taking those submissions. There's 3 outcomes of those. One would be the course is just approved. That generally happens on title alone. So you'll see English 1, English 2, those automatically approved. Every once in a while we get a course where we might need additional information, and we'll ask the high school for that. And then of course, some courses are just not approved. Generally it could be because they just don't fall under our core course subject area. So things like PE, fine arts, those types of courses that don't fall under that English, math, science, social science, comparative religion, and philosophy. This group also is the one that completes the individualized course reviews. So if you see a high school with an account status of extended evaluation, we may request more information from them. We will request the assignments, the grade books, we'll request all the coursework the student did to make a determination on if that can be used in the certification. And they work really hard to stay up to date and educated regarding the secondary education trends in our country. I always like to let people know most everyone on their staff is a former high school teacher, so none of this is new to them. You know, course curriculums are not new to them, grading's not new to them. So this is definitely a group that's an expert in their area. And they also do homeschool reviews. So if you ever have students that have been homeschooled, you know, they have to provide more information just in terms of their core course worksheets and transcripts. But there's another great resource on that on the portal. It's called the Homeschool Toolkit. And again, the high school review staff is who you would work with on that process. Next up, we have our academic and amateurism review staff. On the academic side, these are the people that process the initial eligibility waivers, and they oversee the automatic waivers. So you'll see a list of the automatic waivers on the portal. And then also you're probably familiar, you've probably heard about the COVID-19 automatic waiver. This is the group that oversees that. They also conduct the PSA review process. So that's a validity review of academic credentials. We have a PSA review trigger list on our portal that you can look at if you ever need to. Some examples of those would be graduating from a high school where you didn't complete any core coursework. It would be earning an unusually large amount of credit in one term, and then taking courses out of sequence. So say taking geometry before Algebra 1. Generally, one of those is not enough to trigger a PSA review. It's usually a couple that does that, but if you ever have any questions, it would be the academic review staff you'd work with, and again, those resources are on the portal for you. On the amateurism side, they are the ones that review any cases that require a higher level of membership collaboration. So if it goes beyond just working with the PSA or the PSA's team, they need your assistance, this is the group that will reach out to you about that. They're also the ones that oversee the decision inquiry forms. So I'm not sure how many of you have ever submitted those, but if you have a PSA who receives an amateurism decision with conditions, but then information comes later, you'll just want to, that you didn't have at the time, you can submit the decision inquiry form, and that's the group that reviews those. Next, we have our customer service staff. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with them. They're an excellent group to work with. They provide guidance regarding initial eligibility rules and policies and procedures. They answer questions on domestic and international accounts, and they assist with account analysis regarding status and timeline, and anything else you might have questions on, they can help you. They also do proactive outreach when potential issues are identified. So I believe it's twice a year that they do these big pushes to find all the students who maybe have potential issues, like they have attended a school with no core course list. So we need to contact the high school and get that process started. They do that and they try to reach out to the high schools and the member schools to let them know. And they try and catch as many of these issues as they can. Obviously, they can't catch everything. So if you ever see an issue that you're wondering, oh, this might result in a problem, go ahead and reach out to us. Our customer service staff will help you with that. And then next we have outreach and strategic partnerships. This is the staff that's responsible for updating and creating initial eligibility resources for member schools, PSAs, coaches, high schools, etc. We work with the international community to educate about NCAA eligibility. We have a staff member that works solely with the international community. She is busy right now doing a lot of webinars with different countries. She partners with Education USA a lot to educate on requirements, and also just right now, especially letting the international community know we're paying attention to what's going on. We're trying to stay on top of everything that the international community is dealing with when it comes to travel. So we have a great partner there to work with them. And then we also do outreach and education to high schools, districts, NCAA schools, PSAs, and their families. Pretty much anyone who is involved with the PSA, we really want to work with them to let them know about initial eligibility requirements as early as possible so they have the best possible chance to become qualifiers when they're ready to enroll. And then you just have some best practices that I wanted you all to keep in mind that can help on campus. The first one is keep your institutional request list updated. I know this is a big job. I know you have a lot of kids on those lists. But it's something that can help because we take our cues from you guys with who's on that list as to who needs the certification. So when those lists stay updated and you're removing people that are no longer coming to your school, we can put our resources to the students that are enrolling in the fall or the spring. So that's a good thing to remind coaches when you send out those lists, letting them know where, everybody stands. Just, don't be afraid to say, let me know if I need to remove anybody. And on the flip side, is there anybody that needs to be added? Because we all know how August gets. There's walk-ons, there's late recruits, transfers. So keeping that IRL updated is a great way to try and prevent as many last-minute issues as possible. Along those lines, encourage PSAs to register early and provide complete and accurate information. So we recommend PSAs enroll in year 9 or year 10. I mean, there's no harm in getting in there, getting their account set up if they want to play Division I or II. And when I say provide complete and accurate information, it's just little things like listing every high school you attended. So if you attended 3 high schools, we need to know about all 3 of those. We need to know about all your sports teams. This can save time on the back end so that we don't have to go back and ask for the information or submit the task later on and wait for that to come in. You also want to monitor the membership portal for process changes and updates. When we have announcements, we put them there. We also put our office closures there, so just be mindful of that and check that when you log in. And then again, I know I talked about it earlier, but please sign up for the newsletter. It's really important information. It's stuff that you guys need to know. It's stuff that can help you on campus. And then again, the tracking of issues with our reports feature on the portal is a great way to, just find all those issues with one list as opposed to maybe breaking it up by sport every time. It's just another option when you need it. And then encourage early submission of academic documentation. I think this is especially important for international students. We know that there's just more documentation that comes with them as well. We need translations a lot of times. So when you're working with those recruits, please encourage them just to send in what they have when they can, because that can help us just avoid delays at the last minute. And then finally, when you're preparing an initial eligibility waiver, focus on the mitigation for deficiencies. I used to work on the waiver team. I know that sometimes you'll have those instances where the student is short just a few courses or even a course, and then the GPA is just a few points short. And we want to say, hey, this student is really close, so they should, you know, be approved. Just keep in mind that the initial eligibility waiver team, they're always going to look at the mitigation as well as the size of the deficiency. So they're always going to ask, why is the deficiency there? What happened? What is the reason for missing the core courses or the GPA? So just keep that in mind. That'll help put you in one of the best situations when you submit the waiver. And be sure to check out the IEW directive. That is also on the portal, and it's got scenarios that explain situations where, you know, that warrant full approval, partial approval, or maybe scenarios that would not receive approval. So that can really help you when you're submitting those as well. And then if you still have questions, you can contact the Eligibility Center. I'm going to look at some of the questions that were sent in by chat as well, but I just wanted to make sure you all have our contact information. We have a dedicated membership line. We are here 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. EC-processing at nci.org is where you can submit documents if you're using the academic record submission form. Please don't send account inquiries here because this goes through different groups, so you would get a very delayed response if you were sending questions about an account. If you have those you want to send via email, please send them to ecinfo@nca.org. That is manned by our customer service staff. It's membership only, so please don't share it with PSAs or high schools because we want to make sure that we can get your questions answered as quickly as possible. And we have other avenues for those groups to reach out to us. You can also follow us on social media. Twitter, we are at NCAA-EC, and that is, I know a lot of compliance departments follow us because they like to retweet some of our stuff to their coaches and PSAs, so it's just another good place to get information out there. And then we're on Instagram at Play College Sports, so you can follow us there as well. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today. We really appreciate it. Please don't hesitate to reach out to our staff if you have questions. We're here to help.
And I'll jump in. Kara, thank you so much for joining us today and presenting all that great and useful information about the Eligibility Center. I want to thank all of our participants today for sitting in with us. This does conclude the second and final session for Welcome to the World of Compliance. I will note this, please be on the lookout for on NCAA.org as well as the LMS. We have a lot more sessions and educational materials that will be coming your way. We did either some static, just pre-recorded sessions, as well as some handouts. So you will see that in the near future that will hopefully help you on campus. As a reminder, this was recorded and will also be located on LMS. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and please don't forget to check out the remaining regional rule sessions that are scheduled for the future. Thank you so much.